Welcome to another episode of real-life haunted stories. If you love chilling tales and spine-tingling horror stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a scare. New nightmares drop every week. Stay haunted. So, let's start our today's episode. Today, I am going to share 5 real horror stories about abandoned hospital, full of eerie encounters, psychological terror, and supernatural horror. So, let's start. Story 1. Whispers of Briarwood Asylum. The rain drizzled steadily, casting a thin mist over the skeletal remains of Briarwood Asylum. Once a bustling psychiatric hospital, it had been abandoned for over 4 decades. Nature had slowly begun reclaiming it. Vines curled around broken windows. The roof sagged under years of decay, and the air smelled of damp wood and something else, something rotten. Ethan Graves stared at the asylum's looming structure. It had been his obsession for years. As a journalist specializing in urban legends, Briarwood was the Holy Grail, a place riddled with horrific tales of botched lobotomies, violent patients, and a mass disappearance in 1968 that had never been solved. Along with his friends Sam, Riley, and Jake, Ethan had come to document the truth. But as they crossed the rusted gates, he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside was waiting for them. And it had been waiting a long time. The first thing they noticed was the moon's silence. Not even the sound of insects or distant traffic broke the oppressive stillness. It was as if the entire asylum was holding its breath. Sam, the group's skeptic, scoffed. "It's just an old building. Let's get some footage and get out." The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating faded patient files, rusted wheelchairs, and old hospital beds covered in grime. The scent of mildew clung to the air, but beneath it was something fouler, like spoiled meat. "Hey," Riley called, her voice uncertain. "Look at this." She pointed to the main hallway, where bloody handprints lined the walls. They were smeared and erratic, as if people had been dragged. But the strangest part, the blood was fresh. No one had been inside for decades. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but Ethan pressed forward. He needed answers. They ventured into Ward C, where the most violent patients had been housed. The doors to the rooms were reinforced with iron bars, their peeling numbers barely legible. The smell of mold, urine, and something decayed thickened. Jake trailed behind, filming everything. His camera lens caught something strange. Movement in the rooms, shadows flickering just out of sight. Then they heard it. A whispering chorus, low and fevered like 100 voices mumbling at once. Riley clutched Ethan's arm. "Tell me you hear that." The whispering grew louder. Some voices pleaded, others laughed hysterically, and one was speaking directly to them. "You shouldn't be here." The lights flickered, and the air turned icy cold. A sudden slam echoed as one of the cell doors burst open on its own. Inside, the room was empty, except for deep claw marks gouged into the walls. Sam turned pale. "Okay, I'm officially creeped out." But they couldn't leave. Not yet. Something was pulling them deeper inside. At the heart of the hospital lay the operating room, where Briarwood's most sinister rumors originated. The hospital had performed hundreds of experimental lobotomies before it shut down. Many patients had died screaming on the table. The room still held rusted surgical tools, a blood-stained operating chair, and cracked jars filled with preserved human organs. Ethan felt his stomach churn. The air felt thick, as if the walls themselves had absorbed decades of suffering. Then, our surgical lights flickered on by themselves. The whispering voices returned, but this time they were clearer, louder, more desperate, and one voice stood out. "Help me." A deafening crash erupted behind them. The gurney slid violently across the floor. Surgical trays fell, sending scalpels clattering. And then, on the cracked surgical mirror, something wrote itself in smeared red. "Leave before he wakes." Riley backed away, shaking. "Who wakes? What the hell does that mean?" A guttural growl echoed from the darkness. The whispering stopped. Something else was here now, something angry. The group ran, sprinting through the endless hallways as the asylum shifted around them. Doors that had been open were now sealed shut. Windows were bricked over. The whispering returned. But this time, it was screaming. The shadows twisted, forming half-decayed figures, their eyes hollow, their mouths stretched into silent wails. Patients. The ones who had never escaped. Jake tripped, and the darkness swallowed him whole. Ethan turned back, screaming his name, but there was only a blood stain where he had fallen. A deep, rasping breath filled the air, and then footsteps. Heavy, slow. Dr. Harrow was coming. The survivors, Ethan, Riley, and Sam, found themselves back at the main entrance. But something was wrong. The front doors had not disappeared. "We're trapped," Riley whispered. Then the lights died. A scalpel scraped across metal. And in the suffocating darkness, the voice of Dr. Harrow finally spoke. "I've been waiting for new patients." Days later, the police found no trace of Ethan, Riley, Sam, or Jake. Their camera was recovered, its footage distorted and filled with static. But in the last clear frame, a single figure could be seen: Dr. Victor Harrow, standing in the shadows, watching, waiting for the next visitors. Story 2. The Hollowmoor Sanatorium Incident. The wind howled through the shattered windows of Hollowmoor Sanatorium, carrying with it whispers of a time long past. Perched on the outskirts of town, the asylum had been abandoned for over 50 years, after a series of grotesque medical scandals. Patients vanished, doctors disappeared, and the hospital was suddenly shut down in 1971, its remaining staff refusing to speak of what had happened inside. No one dared to enter. Until now, Sarah Miller, a documentary filmmaker, had come with her team, Nate, Olivia, and Ben, to uncover the truth. Armed with cameras, flashlights, and a deep curiosity, they ignored the local warnings and stepped past the rusted gates. And in that moment, Hollowmoor awakened. The interior of Hollowmoor was a frozen nightmare, as if the patients and staff had abandoned it overnight. Rusting gurneys, faded medical charts, and blood-stained walls told a story of violence and suffering. "This place is wrong," Olivia murmured. Sarah waved her flashlight across the peeling wallpaper, stopping at a cracked patient record. The name was smudged, but the last word was clear. Then, from somewhere deep within the hospital, a noise echoed, a long, ragged breath. They were not alone. Nate found a door that had been bolted shut from the outside. The words, "Keep him inside," was scratched into the wood. Ben, the tech guy, picked the lock. The door groaned open, revealing a darkened hallway lined with padded rooms. A foul stench, rotten something, sour, rolled out to greet them. Sarah's flashlight flickered as she stepped inside. At the far end of the corridor, a single wheelchair sat facing the wall. Then, without warning, it turned toward them on its own. The air turned ice cold. And then, footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate, coming closer. Terrified, they fled into what appeared to be the head doctor's office. Inside, stacks of brittle patient files lay scattered. Olivia grabbed one and read aloud. Patient 204, severe regression, no longer responds to external stimuli. Has begun repeating the phrase he is watching in unknown languages. Experiment halted. Subject missing. Sarah's breath hitched. Missing? How do you lose a patient in a locked asylum? The answer came when the door slammed shut behind them, and the whispering began. You shouldn't be here. They escaped back into the hall, but something had changed. The layout was different. The door they had entered from was gone. Did we take a wrong turn? Nate asked, voice shaking, but Sarah knew the truth. The hospital was moving. A shadow shifted at the end of the corridor, standing just beyond the reach of their flashlight beams. Tall, gaunt, featureless. And then it moved, straight toward them. They ran, turning blindly down hallway after hallway. The walls felt closer, tighter, like the building was collapsing around them. Then they found the basement doors. Carved into the rusted metal was a message. It lives below. Olivia hesitated. Maybe we shouldn't. But the thing in the hall was getting closer. They had no choice. They yanked open the doors and descended into the darkness below. And Hollowmore swallowed them whole. The basement was worse than the hospital above. Chains hung from the ceiling. Bones lay scattered across the floor. And in the center of the room stood an iron cage. The door was open. Ben checked his camera. Guys, there are people down here. Sarah turned and saw them. Dozens of figures standing in the shadows, silent, still. Their hospital gowns were all tattered, their eyes white and empty. Then one of them stepped forward, and it smiled. The air shivered, like reality itself was tearing apart. The patients began whispering in unison, voices overlapping in an unholy chant. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming. Then the cage door slammed shut on its own, and something massive stirred in the darkness. The whispering stopped. Then came a new sound, a deep, rattling breath, and then a voice. You woke me up. They ran for their lives, but the hallways kept shifting, leading them in circles. The hospital was alive. The shadow in the hall was closer now, moving in unnatural jerks, its arms too long, its face shifting. Then the lights died, and one by one, they started disappearing. Ben was the first, dragged screaming into the darkness. Then Olivia, her flashlight dropped, flickering. Then Nate, his final words, a strangled help, before he was yanked into a doorway that hadn't been there before, until only Sarah remained, standing before the iron cage, staring at the thing inside, the thing that should not exist, the thing that had waited 50 years and for someone to open the doors. Weeks later, Sarah's camera was found just outside the hospital gates. The footage showed nothing at first, just static and broken audio. Then, in the final seconds, Sarah's face appeared, pale, terrified, whispering into the lens. "He's awake. Don't come looking for us." The screen flickered just for a moment, and behind her, a tall figure loomed in the shadows, watching, waiting for the next visitors. Story 3. The Ashwood Sanitarium Incident. The final transmission from Ashwood Sanitarium that came at 3:07 a.m. on October 12, 1985. A security guard's trembling voice crackled through the emergency radio channel. They're all awake. They're not supposed to be awake. A long, agonized scream followed. Then, silence. Ashwood was shut down the next morning. 36 patients and 7 staff members were never found. For nearly 4 decades, the hospital remained sealed off. But in 2023, urban explorer Dylan Carter and his crew decided to enter the abandoned ruins. They were never seen again, but their cameras were recovered, and the footage was horrifying. The air smelled like rot and old antiseptic. As Dylan, Casey, Jordan, and Lucas stepped inside Ashwood Sanitarium, the place was frozen in time. Rusted gurneys stood abandoned in the halls. Wheelchairs sat facing the walls, as if someone had pushed them there. The peeling wallpaper revealed dark stains beneath it. "This place is a damn horror movie," Casey muttered, scanning the room. Lucas, the skeptic, scoffed. "It's just an old hospital. Let's get the footage and bounce." Then Jordan found something, a patient logbook. The last entry dated the night Ashwood shut down. The final note was just one sentence, scribbled in frantic handwriting. "He is watching from the basement." A metallic clang echoed from deeper inside the building, and they weren't alone anymore. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The cameras picked up something strange, static interference, like an old TV struggling to find a signal. Then Lucas spotted the door. It was different from the others, reinforced with heavy steel bars. Someone had scratched words into it, barely visible under layers of dust. "Do not open. Do not let him out." Jordan aimed his flashlight at the keyhole, revealing deep scratch marks around it. "Something was trying to get out," she whispered. And then the door handle moved. Not from the outside, from within. The whispers started as they left the locked wing. Soft, desperate murmurs, filling the air like a chorus of suffering. Then came the footsteps. Not theirs. Something was walking through the hospital, just out of sight. Lucas turned to Dylan. "Tell me you hear that." But Dylan wasn't listening. He was staring at something behind them. A figure, tall, wearing a hospital gown, face covered in gauze. It stood at the end of the hallway, motionless, until it took a shaking step forward and whispered in a voice, "Not human. You're not supposed to be here." The lights flickered and the screaming began. They ran, blinded by fear, lost in the endless halls of Ashwood. The whispers turned to laughter, twisted, mocking. Lucas tried the exit doors. They wouldn't open. "We need to get to the roof," Dylan gasped. "Signal for help." But the stairs to the roof were blocked. The only way was up to the 3rd floor, the level where the worst patients had been kept, where they had performed the experiments, and where something had gone terribly, horribly wrong. The 3rd floor was different. Darker. Wrong. The walls were covered in claw marks, some deep enough to expose bone beneath the plaster. One room stood out. 366. The door was open. Inside, they found chains hanging from the walls. The bed had deep scratches, as if someone had been held there for years. Then Casey saw the mirror. She gasped, because in the reflection there was something standing behind them. Tall, emaciated, wrapped in old hospital restraints. A face hidden behind a blood-stained mask. And then it moved. The hospital shifted around them, hallways stretching and twisting, trapping them inside. The shadows grew longer. The whispers grew louder. And then Dylan saw it. At the end of the hallway, a staircase leading down to the basement, to him. Jordan shook her head. We can't go down there. But the stairs pulled them forward, like something below had been waiting for them to arrive. The basement smelled like blood and decay. The floor was covered in strange symbols, smeared in something dark, and in the center of the room stood a single hospital bed, straps still fastened, empty. Then the overhead fluorescent lights flickered on, and for the first time, they saw him. The last patient, the reason Ashwood had been shut down, tall, wrapped in restraints, masked, but now awake and smiling. He took a step forward, and the lights died. They sprinted for the exit, but the hospital was alive now. The hallways stretched infinitely. Lucas fell first, dragged into the dark. Jordan's screams echoed. Then silence. Casey was yanked into an empty room. The door slammed shut behind her until only Dylan remained, breathing hard, alone, or so he thought, because when he turned around, the last patient was standing right behind him, watching, waiting. A month later, Dylan's camera was found outside Ashwood's gates. The final frame showed him running, screaming before the screen cut to black. But audio specialists found one last sound on the recording, buried beneath the static, a voice, deep, hollow. More patients, soon. Ashwood Sanitarium still stands, still waiting for the next ones to enter, and when they do, he'll be watching. Story 4. Blackwood General, the hospital that never lets you leave. In 1998, Dr. Jonathan Reeves, the head physician at Blackwood General Hospital, vanished during his night shift. Security footage showed him walking into room 733, a long-abandoned wing of the hospital. He never came out. The hospital shut down a year later. No one ever found his body. 25 years later, Claire Thompson, an aspiring journalist, led a group of urban explorers into Blackwood General to investigate the legend of Room 733. Her team, Mike, Allison, and Eric, set up cameras documenting everything. The halls were eerily intact, as if the hospital had been waiting for them. Then Claire's radio crackled. A faint voice whispered through the static, "You shouldn't have come." And then the power east flickered on. Even though the hospital had been abandoned for decades, Mike adjusted his camera. "Guys, something just moved at the end of the hall." They turned, flashlights trembling. A figure stood in the darkness, just beyond their reach, motionless, watching. Then it stepped forward. The overhead lights flickered, and the figure was suddenly growing closer. They found room 733. The door was unlocked. Inside, they discovered an old hospital bed, its straps unfastened. The air was thick with a smell of decay. On the walls, scrawled in dried baton blood, was a single word: "Don't." Then the door slammed shut, and the whispers began. They heard footsteps outside the room, but when they opened the door, the hallway was different. The hospital had changed. The walls were cleaner, the overhead lights buzzing to life, and figures in old patient gowns stood lined up against the walls, their heads tilted, their eyes wide and unblinking. Then one of them spoke. "You have to leave before he wakes up." And from somewhere deeper inside, something moved. Something big. Something hungry. They ran through the endless maze of hallways, but every exit was gone. The hospital had sealed them inside. Then a tall figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. A doctor's coat, a stethoscope, a face wrapped in gauze. Dr. Reeves, or what was left of him. His head twitched violently as he whispered, "Time for your treatment." The lights died, and the screaming began. Eric was the first to disappear. One moment, he was behind them. The next, gone. Then they found the surgery room. The operating table was covered in restraints. Surgical tools lay scattered, rusted with old blood. Heartbeat monitor suddenly beeped to life, and then behind them, the doors swung open, and Dr. Reeves walked in, holding a scalpel. Smiling, Mike screamed as Reeves grabbed him, dragging him toward the operating table. The hallway stretched, twisted, pulling Allison and Claire into separate corridors. Claire ran, turning blindly through the maze of rooms. Every door led to another hospital ward, another hallway, another nightmare. There was no exit. There was never an exit. And then, in the flickering overhead lights, she saw them, the patients, hundreds of them, staring, waiting. And then, in unison, they whispered, "Welcome to Blackwood. You're one of us now." 2 weeks later, Claire's camera was found outside Blackwood General's gates. The footage ended with her face in the darkness, whispering desperately, "Don't come here. There's no way out. This hospital never lets you leave." Then, just before the screen cut to black, a tall figure appeared behind her and smiled. Story 5. The Whispering Ward, Hellbrook Hospital's Last Patients. On June 6, 1974, Hellbrook Hospital was permanently shut down after a mass disappearance of patients and staff. The last recorded radio transmission came from a nurse on the night shift. They're all standing in the hallway, just staring, but their mouths, oh God, their mouths. The message cut off with a sharp, unnatural screech. When police arrived, they found the hospital completely empty. The patients were gone. The staff were gone. Only the empty, whispering halls remained. 49 years later, Ethan Calloway, a paranormal investigator, led his team, Harper, Jake, and Maddie, into the abandoned Hellbrook Hospital. As soon as they crossed the threshold, their cameras flickered. The air inside was wrong, too still, too heavy. Then, a single on a hospital intercom crackled to life, and a woman's voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Harper found an old medical chart, its pages yellowed with time, the last recorded patient entry was chilling. Patient number 99, admitted for violent outbursts and uncontrollable whispering. Behavior has spread to other patients. The sound is infectious. We must keep them quiet. Then, footsteps echo down the hall, heavy, slow, dragging. And from somewhere nearby, they heard breathing. But no one else was supposed to be here. Jake aimed his flashlight down the hall, and then the shadows shifted, not from their own movement. Something was standing there, watching. Then the shadows moved toward them, not walking, sliding, and the whispering began. Soft at first, then louder, until it was coming from every direction. They found a rusted metal door, labeled Word X, do not open. It was padlocked shut, but something on the other side was moving. A slow, scraping sound against the door. Then a faint voice from within. Help us. Harper stepped forward. We have to open it. Maddie shook her head. Number. They locked it for a reason. Then, from inside the ward, a deep voice rasped, Let us out. The lock snapped open on its own. The ward was lined with hospital beds, each one covered in restraining straps. But the beds were empty, except for one. At the far end of the room, a single patient remained, thin, motionless, wrapped in old hospital restraints. His face was covered in gauze. Then, without warning, his head snapped toward them, and his mouth began to move. But no sound came out. Then, every single hospital bed started shaking violently, and the whispering voices exploded into screams. They ran, but the hospital wasn't the same anymore. The hallways stretched endlessly, twisting, turning, trapping them inside. Then the lights flickered, and standing in the darkness were dozens of patients, all whispering, their mouths stretched open impossibly wide, their voices filling the air, vibrating through the walls. Then, from the depths of the hospital, something bigger began to move, something that had been waiting for them. Ethan turned the corner and froze. A massive figurante stood in the shadows, 7 feet tall, wrapped in decayed hospital bandages. Its head twitched unnaturally, mouth opening and closing, like it was trying to form words. Then, for the first time in 50 years, it spoke. Stay with us. The lights died, and the whispering voices became one. A sound so loud it filled every corner of the building, a sound that shattered reality itself. Maddie's camera was found 2 weeks later. The footage showed her running through the hospital, whispering frantically to herself. It won't stop whispering. It's inside my head. You can't leave once you hear it. Don't listen. Don't listen. Then, in the last few seconds of the video, a tall, bandaged figure appeared behind her, smiling, whispering. And then, the screen cut to black. Hellbrook remains abandoned, but sometimes, if you stand near its entrance at night, you'll hear it, the whispering, soft at first, then louder, until it's right behind you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, to show your support, comment to share your thoughts or ask questions, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.